Representative Swalwell, thank you so much for joining me on the State of Belief.
My pleasure. Thank you, Reverend. It's really nice of you to bring me on.
Listen, you have been so helpful to so many of us right now. So I'm starting from a place of gratitude in this conversation. I want you to know how much it has meant to so many of us to have your voice in the public square, to sometimes saying what we really want to say, and you can say it. And I want to start just by checking in, just doing like a spiritual, mental, physical health check and saying, like, how are you doing? Because this takes a toll. And I'm not assuming that you are, the Iron Superman's Man of Steel. How are you doing?
No, thank you for asking. No, it's rough. It's not easy times. It's not easy times for many people who are losing their jobs right now or having their Medicaid potentially cut. So I don't feel too sorry for myself. But if I'm being really honest with you, every morning I have to get a 7-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 3-year-old out of bed, dressed, fed, off to school, and that, like, hour is always the hardest hour of the day, and so it gets much easier no matter, how challenging it is. So I'm a father first, and, yeah, that's the hardest part of my day. Put any other challenge or colleague in front of me, and it's easy compared to that.
I love that. I have a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old, and so, like, I will say, like, it's kind of the best part of my day and the
Yeah,
most challenging. Like, I love spending time with them. I love, like, kind of like, "Okay, and now would you please eat your eggs so that we
that's
can
right.
move along with the day?"
Yeah,
They
that's right.
they are your hardest audience to convince, but it's also
Reverend, I tell people my days typically consist of, bribery, hostage negotiations, empty threats, and that's just getting my kids out of bed and to school.
I love that. Yeah, right. And then, if I may be so bold as to say, then you have to deal with a toddler in the White House,
Yeah,
and so like almost it's been a good warm up. So I do just want to say like. From the bottom of my heart, and as a pastor, as someone who's just please take care of yourself. I'm saying
thank
that
you.
to everyone. I do. I also appreciate the fact that this is hard on our representatives, but there are people who are being directly targeted. There are
Yeah.
real consequences to what is happening here, and it is very
Well, I'll tell you one person I checked in with today. I don't know if you know John Sexton, NYU,
I do know John Sexton, not well, but I've met him several times. Yeah,
but a religious scholar.
yeah.
He wrote a book called, "Baseball is a Road to God," and drew parallels between baseball and faith. And I actually just, for my own, like, mental welfare check today, I just called John and I said, "John, tell me what I'm not thinking about that I should be thinking about." And that actually really helped me just kind of set the table for what's ahead. So he's always a good, just, life coach to reach out to.
I love that, and he's a great idea, but we should all have those people around us who kind of expand the aperture of what is happening right now so that I don't get so narrowly focused that I lose a bigger picture that maybe other people can introduce me to, and
Right.
I think that's the reason not to isolate. It's the reason to be in conversation with as many people as possible. I was fascinated by your background because, you come from a very solid, I believe, now this, you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong, but your parents were Republican. They were,
Right.
your mother was a small business owner. Your father was involved in the police force. That is like, it's a very grounding place to be from. Tell us a little bit about your
No.
background, because I think, when we see representatives like yourself, we think they kind of came out as
Yeah.
that. But actually, there's like, everybody's from somewhere. Where are you from?
Yeah, I was born in Iowa, in Western Iowa, Sac City. My dad was a police officer. My mom made wedding cakes and
Mm.
made ceramics, and sold those to the community. And my earliest memory, Reverend, was I was 6 years old, and my mom and dad were talking about my dad potentially being fired, and I remember that because I thought, like, literally he was gonna be put in a fire. That's why, like, it
Mm,
stayed in
mm.
my head, but in a very Iowa way, he was standing up as a police chief to small town corruption, and he had a mayor who thought he could have the police chief, just do what he wanted or make cases go away that he wanted to go away. And in a very Iowa fashion, it came to a head at the Kossuth County Fair when the mayor and other council members parked in the fire lane. And the fire chief called my dad and said, "Chief, these guys say they can park wherever they want. What do you want me to do?" And my dad, being, really like such a Boy Scout and a rule follower, said, "No, that's for emergencies. If they don't move, ticket and tow them." They didn't move. They were ticketed and towed. And in a nakedly corrupt way, at the next city council meeting, the mayor told my dad, "If you don't reverse those tickets, I'm going to fire you." And my dad held his ground, said, "That's not the way it works," and lost his job. And we picked up our little family, and that's how we ended up out west and ultimately in
Wow.
California. And I would later go and read the Des Moines Register coverage of this, and I was just shocked that, like, the mayor would be so openly corrupt, and the editorial page of the Des Moines Register was also equally shocked. But what I learned from my dad and what stayed with me, and it frankly was frustrating as a kid growing up in such a rules-based household, was that he was willing to lose his job to do what's right. And now I work at an office, so to speak, where I have a lot of colleagues who are not willing to lose their job, and they see their first duty as, how do I protect my job, and then do what's wrong oftentimes. And I say this because privately they'll tell me they don't like what they see the president doing, but they're afraid of being primaried or
Mm.
losing an election. So that was my earliest memory, and that was my upbringing. But we went to I went to Sunday school. Um, on Sundays, and we went to church. We were, raised Lutheran. I would later, go to a Christian college on a soccer scholarship, Campbell University, a school in North
Yeah,
Carolina.
sure, sure.
And my faith evolved as well. And then my, local church is Cornerstone, which is in Livermore, California. And the founder of that church, Pastor Steve Matson, he was a part of my wedding
Mm.
with my wife Brittany back in 2016.
Wow. I mean, that story is so powerful about your background. First of all, I'm from Wisconsin, so I knew I
Yeah.
liked you. I knew I would liked you and also had a slight rivalry, but all good.
That's good. I married a
The
Hoosier. My wife's from Southern Indiana.
oh
So,
my
yeah.
goodness. But we're having a Midwestern festival here today, but um, that kind of integrity is actually like that's a lesson you never forget, and
That's right.
set the bar. And then you have to decide, where do I fit with that bar? But that bar has been set for me, and that's really strong, and I think that's so admirable that he didn't back down,
They
'cause
did back down.
it was all we can all make this go away if you just back down.
Right. And Reverend, I was talking to my dad a couple nights ago, and he said to me, he said, I'm so worried about your security and your kids.
Yeah.
And we were talking about baseball tryouts for my son. And he said, like, do you think maybe you could just like be quieter and not like speak out as much? And I said, "Dad," I said, "you know why I'm so loud and not going away?" I said, "It was you. Like, it's because of the way that you were." He would later go on. There was a local school board member when I was in high school who kept picking up like DUIs and like was trying to use school funding to make renovations on his house. And my dad would like read me these stories, and he was so outraged. And I finally said to him, I said, "Dad, why don't you run against this guy? Like, why don't you run for the city council?" And he did. I was up for the school board, and he did, and he won. So like I've always
Wow.
had this model of somebody who wouldn't just take it and wouldn't just accept it. And when others wouldn't do the right thing, he would take it upon himself to do it.
Well, thank you to your father. What's his name?
Eric, it's also Eric.
Also, Eric. Well, thank you, Eric, for that incredible lesson for all of us actually right now, because we're all faced with this choice. I mean, and let me just, this is not an aside, but one of the first things that the president did was pardon all of the J6 rioters, which must have really, I mean, it must have hurt you on a couple different levels. As someone who was threatened that day, as an American who saw American democracy attacked, and then also as someone who comes from a
Sure.
family that's, has the force involved in it, the police force involved with it, and what they did that day, and
Yeah.
the incredible, like, washing and say, "Oh, they were tourists." I mean, it's unbelievable. So that must have been for you like, "Oh, I see what's happening. I see what is about to go down." I think that was the first time that many Republicans were like, "What?" Even the violent offenders. I mean, what
So,
was it?
Reverend, that day in the chamber, we waited and sheltered in place as the rioters closed in on us, and you could hear this like
Thumping.
on the doors
Oh, yeah,
outside
they were
the
pounding the
chamber.
doors. Yeah.
And it was a haunting sound because there's not many windows in the chamber, so you can't see, you can only hear.
Wow.
And we saw the Capitol police officers scramble to stack chairs and desks against the doors so that they couldn't make their way in. And we waited for their orders. They told us, please don't leave yet. We're securing an evacuation route. And we followed them out, and many of them stayed back, to protect the chamber. As one young woman, broke her way, through the glass, the last barrier. One of those lieutenants had to make that, a decision. I'm sure it was the right decision, but like, as an officer, I don't think you ever take pleasure in taking somebody's life, but he saved many others. And so as we were leaving, that gunshot was fired, and these officers would be beaten. One lost an eye, one lost a finger. Many, would die by suicide in the days following. And yes, to me, first and foremost, is a son of a cop and a brother to two cops. I'm grateful to, their service. And I thought very naively, even as we were fleeing, and as you're on that evacuation route, I'm running with Republicans. At one point, in pushing Madison Cawthorn, a Republican who's in a wheelchair who attended the rally earlier in the morning with the president and spoke, I'm pushing his wheelchair up a ramp because it's too steep. And he looked back at me in terror and said, push me. And so I'm pushing this guy up who like helped like convene the rioters, in the first place. And I thought naively, well, this is rock bottom and we'll come together now. And I thought it would almost be like a September 11 moment where we would come together and that those police officers ultimately would be honored and lionized. And instead, they've been villainized. And we've been told by President Trump that, the heroes of the day were the people who attacked the Capitol. So yeah, it is a punch in the gut. And I'm very close with many of the officers from that day. I've spent a few Thanksgivings with Officer Mike Fanone, who had voted for Donald
Right.
Trump, in the past and showed up that day and suffered a traumatic brain injury and a heart attack. And so, yeah, it still stings to see how this has been turned.
Yeah. And it was the absolute pardon was a foretaste of the kind of just wrecking ball that has been taken
Yeah.
to our society, our democracy, and
And I think,
there's
blessed are the peacemakers, for they're the children of God, right? That's, what we learn at the earliest of ages, from the book of Matthew. And they were peacemakers. And, I know in the eyes, of God, he knows, who were heroes that day.
mm. Well, thank you for preaching a little bit there. I think you may have a vocation after
Yeah.
after you go all the way with politics. That's exactly right. I mean, they were the ones who were trying to keep the peace, and there were those who were really attacking, and they have continued to
Sure.
attack at all the pillars of our democracy,
That's right.
all the ways that government can function to support and to help people live and thrive in our country. And so, we can't go through the laundry list because it's too long. We
Yeah.
would just spend time going that. But
Yep.
what What tools do we have? What tools do you feel like are, every day? I mean, as we're recording this, there's, I think an EO is coming out just abolishing the Department of Education. And by the time people listen to this, that may be old news. There might be another thing that has happened. So many things have happened. Social Security, USAID, people are going to die because of all of this. What are How do you just take us just well, let's take the lens back. How do you understand this moment, and what are the tools that Congress has in this moment?
We should pick fights that we can win and go into battles where we can win and not waste our constituents, time and energy on ones where we cannot. So I think being candid and honest about what we can do, and Donald Trump has bragged, this is his government. He has the House and the Senate and the White House, but we're not helpless because we picked up 10 seats in the House, and so they can only lose one or two votes on every vote. So we're not helpless, but we also, should be careful not to fall into any trap that, the Democrats could shut down the government. Well, I would say first, this is Donald Trump and Elon Musk's government, and second, they're already shutting it down. Like they like when you lay off FAA employees as there's plane crashes and near collisions, you're shutting it down. And you lay off CDC employees as measles is raging through Texas, you're shutting it down. And as you lay off FBI agents, when we started the year with a terrorist attack and we're more vulnerable to terrorism than ever, you're shutting down the government. But we have in the next couple of days a vote to continue or not continue, funding this Trump Musk government. And what Democrats should do is to not co-sign the status quo. Getting rid of the Department of Education, where we would want our kids to be smarter than Donald Trump, right? Like we should want every kid to have the best education. Where, as I said, they're making us less safe from terrorism. They're threatening our healthcare security. So we shouldn't give them the votes to continue that. If they need our votes, and Reverend, in the last 2 years, in the majority, about 6 times, Republicans needed Democratic votes to keep government open. And it wasn't just one vote, it wasn't 10 votes. The majority of the votes to keep government open came from Democrats. And so we shouldn't be, such cheap dates about this. Like we should actually be, there should be a cost. And to me, that cost is, to protect people first and foremost. So any of the cuts that are hurting people, we have to put the funding back in place. And two, I wouldn't give the president, more than 30 days funding at a time, because if we gave him a 9-month or a 12-month budget, it would be shame on us because I wouldn't trust him to honor it. And so almost have like a probationary budget if they need our vote. So that's one fight where, we can win. There's a Wisconsin Supreme Court race coming up. And on the political side, there are 6 Republicans in the Wisconsin delegation to go back to your home state and 2 Democrats. Yet you have a Democratic governor, a Democratic senator there, a Democratic lieutenant governor. But through, gerrymandering, these dirty maps, it's a 6-2 split. That Supreme Court race could bring that to a 4-4 split, which would get us 2/3 of the way to where we need to be to even win the House in 2026. And then finally, just by showing fight inside the Congress, we make waters warm outside the Congress as candidates across the country are making consequential decisions right now as to whether they're going to sacrifice everything, to run for Congress. And so we have to make sure that, we show fight inside so that they want to fight outside to be our colleagues in 2 years. So there's a lot that we can do. We're not helpless. And I think about that every day.
At the whatever that was that Trump did in front of the Congress, I don't want to. It wasn't a State of the Union, and I don't even. It was kind of well, we you can't just. The words escape me for what to describe what an simultaneously offensive and nothing burger that speech was. But Representative Al Green, who I'm sure you've interacted with before, stood up and just said, "You don't have a mandate. You don't have a mandate." And later he talked about like, "I'm taught my constituents are scared because they're cutting Medicaid." I felt like I had to stand up. They just voted to censor him. I'm just
Yeah.
curious, like, I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, but like, there was some of us who just felt like, oh, someone's standing up. I'm not saying, and I know you had your own way of dealing with that moment, but it is, you know, I don't know. We're all trying to
Yeah.
figure out like this is not a normal moment. The kind of
No,
decorum that and the kind of deep respect that I've always had for our political process, trying to, respect that. I just don't know actually how to understand what
Yeah.
civility is and decorum and
That's right.
protocol, So I'm just curious your
So
reaction to that.
I went to the speech. I didn't stay for the whole speech. Frankly, like it was boring.
It was boring. I mean, that was the weird thing. It was both horrific and boring at the same time.
Halfway through, I didn't hear any, you know, offer to work with us on border security, on legal immigration pathways, on making our community safe, on lowering costs. He spent more talking about um, trans sports than he did talking about the cost of eggs. But what I saw Al Green do, that was in the spirit of what I've seen John Lewis do
That's
in the
right.
past. And I think we're each of us are, taking our own approach to, how to deal with Donald Trump. I will just say for myself, I'm of the mindset of like, you're not going to out Trump Trump. That, he, this is what he does. And in fact, um, you have to be mindful of that. That doesn't mean you stand up and applaud for him. I don't think I stood up
No.
um, for any of his policy agenda that he spoke about. But I actually think for us as Democrats, there's pressure to, as to what is your message? What are you going to do? We need to tell a better story, yes. But it's also, to me, it's dance with the one that brought you. And that is the issue of healthcare. That's
Mm,
frankly what Al Green was
mm,
talking about. That is the issue where we are most trusted. That's why Barack
mm,
Obama was elected president in 2008. That's why we won the House in 2018 when Donald Trump tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And as they seek to give the wealthiest Americans a big tax cut, they have to take it out of about a third of Americans' healthcare. And so that's
mm.
where I think we really
Yeah.
have to, go to, which is be the guardian of what people value most in their life, which is their health.
Yeah. Thank you. Um, I'm curious for you. I'm Interfaith Alliance, a national organization. We have
yeah,
affiliates around the country. We have a big mailing list. We're talking to all of our people. What would you like religious leaders? I've asked you a lot about what Congress should be doing. What should religious leaders be doing in this time, or not just religious leaders, but folks who are involved with congregations or other kinds of
Yeah.
spiritual groups? Like, what this is a moment in democracy when we need to show up. Are we showing up correctly? And what would you like to see?
Yeah. So I think what our faith community does best, and I'm blessed that in my own district, 40% of my constituents were born outside the United States. So we have a number of different faiths. We have one of the largest Muslim populations in the country outside of Detroit. We have, more mosques than, or as many mosques as we have, synagogues in our district. And so you have an interfaith environment as well. But what the faith community does best is they show up when people are at their lowest points. And so, to counter, hate that you would see coming from Donald Trump and cruelty, to show compassion and kindness and service, as you do in hurricanes and floods and fires. And the faith community did that in Southern California. And in fact, churches in my Northern California district showed up, to help folks in Southern California during the fires. But I think just, creating that sense of community is a national leader seeks to divide us, local leaders can unite us and to help people. A lot of people are losing their jobs because of these policies. I met yesterday with credit union leaders from my district, and they told me that delinquencies right now are on the rise and the highest that they've seen in 10 years. So people financially are struggling. I think that's where the faith community is always at its best. I would also say, like, one, I guess, quote from a faith leader that I've always drawn on. I'm a Christian, but it's from Rabbi Nachum from Breslov, which is, the world is a very narrow bridge. And the most important part is to have no fear. And I think about that as like, it's a narrow, it's a narrow bridge over this steep canyon that we're going through right now. And to just keep walking. And I think he adds the second part, to have no fear, because I believe what he's saying is God is with you, is you take that walk, but you have to be fearless to get there. And so we fearlessly have to go across that canyon at this point in our country's very, very challenging time.
Thank you so much. That is an unfamiliar quote to me, and I feel very blessed to have heard it. I we work closely with at Interfaith Alliance with Democracy Forward, which is a legal organization that's doing a lot of great litigation. And one of the things that Skye Perryman said, who is also on our board, the head of the policy commission, is she said. She said, right now, actually, the religious groups have been so courageous in the way they have shown up fearlessly to litigate. And I just that stuck with me, this idea of religious groups showing up with courage, which is like the root of that is core, which is heart in Latin, and the idea of like bringing heart to this moment is such a kind of counterintuitive thing to do, but it's also like that is the religious call, and also bringing people together in a time when authoritarianism thrives on isolation and people feeling that they have no friends, no community, and so the only place that they can look is towards this leader. And I think that it's another piece to it. I do want to talk a little, I know we're wrapping up here, but talk a little bit about the way you feel that you communicate best with Americans, your constituents, but also with Americans. You're very much on social media, and
Yeah.
social media has like, social media. Social media is social and it's media, and people
Yeah.
are getting their information from that. It is not a negative word. It can be used negatively, but like anything, it also can be used incredibly well. And you're one of those people who is doing it incredibly well. Can you say, first of all, what channels and how people can follow you for our listeners,
Yeah.
but then
Thank
talk
you for
about
that.
like what's the ethos behind what you try to do there. So let's start with actually where people can go to follow you, because that's
Yeah.
really important, listeners, and then a little bit about what you bring to that.
Yeah. It's at Eric Swalwell on Instagram, Blue Sky, and X. And what I hope I bring to that is just the real me, and that people see, as I try and be as real as possible, and bring people in, to this world where I work. And I also don't shy away about talking about my family. I protect my family, but my family is very much just who I am, and what motivates me. You're like contractually obligated to be optimistic when you have three little kids under 7. And so that's a part of what drives me. But I, I I try and be, as I said, real, and I'm not perfect. And if I'm recording, a video and I stumble over my words or I say something wrong, we put that out. Like, we do first takes only when we record, because I think we have a tendency, and I think more so than Republicans as Democrats, to be so polished and to be, so rigid and scripted. And we think we're projecting what people expect to see from a politician, when I think people find it refreshing when you talk to them like you would talk to them at church, at the bar, at a bus stop. Like,
Yep.
just be yourself. And I tell my colleagues, just be yourself. I mean, we have a president who was convicted of 34 felonies in the Oval Office. Like, you should now be liberated to just be yourself. And you're not trying to win a Harvard Law School moot court competition. You're just trying to win a gut check. And your values will be reflected if you're yourself. They may not be, as I said, perfect, but nobody is. And nobody wants that anyway.
Right, 100%. I think that's amazing, and, I love the idea of first takes, you know, I mean, that is, like, very, not the rule for social media, like, get the take, "Oh, no, that's not your head is tilted the wrong way," you
Yes.
know what I mean? Like, get the right
Right.
take, and then you know, it's so processed that it doesn't land, and what you're trying to be is like a real person who's actually, you know, talking to real people. I love that, and it's so refreshing. We're, you know, as we come to the close of, I'm just, first of all, so grateful to talk to you, but you know, for the couple years I had this show before the last election, I would ask people, what gives you hope? I'm not exactly doing that right now. I'm trying to get a little more tangible, although a lot of times hope was tangible. What is the one thing that you hope people can do in this time? Like, what's that one thing that you feel like, that piece of advice, do this one thing.
Yeah.
And if everybody just does that one thing that can be different for people, I'm not saying it's prescriptive, but like, what's the one idea that people should hear from you right now?
Go one more rung up the ladder. Of where you are right now, go one more rung up the ladder to give yourself more agency and put yourself higher and closer to where decisions are being made. And so, if you've never gone to a local city council meeting before and you care deeply about what's happening in your community, go to a city council meeting. And then the next time you go, speak at the city council meeting. And then find out when those council members are up for election and find one that you can get involved with. So that's just an example, but like, just go one more rung up the ladder, and you're going to find that your agency is not that you registered to vote or that you went and voted. It's that you were a part of the process, and that's why you're important to the people who make decisions in your lives.
This is, I love that. One more rung. I mean, it's like, it's about whatever that is for you, listeners. Like, what is that one more rung to put yourself out there? And so, with that, Representative Eric Swalwell, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and your service to our country.
Yeah. Thank you, Reverend. And thank you to your listeners.